الحمد لله وكفى وسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا قوا أنفسكم وأهليكم نارا وقودها الناس والحجارة عليها ملائكة غلاظ شداد لا يعصون الله ما أمرهم ويفعلون ما يؤمرون وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كلكم راع وكلكم مسؤول عن رعيته أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام اللهم صل على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. Today's topic is parenting, responsible parenting, and it's relevant to those who are parents already or who will become parents in the future. Sometimes you think that this doesn't apply to me because I'm too young, but then before you know it, time passes and you find yourself in that exact spot and you remember something which you learned as an adolescent, even as a child. And it comes back to you. And how many parents are there today who reflect on their own childhood when they become parents themselves, in the manner in which they parent, they fulfill the act of parenting. And so the reality is that this affects everybody, and it's a very important subject. The station, the status, and the rank of a parent is very, very sacred. After all, this is why the Anbiya alayhimus salatu wassalam have been compared to parents. Ibrahim alayhi salatu wassalam is the parent, the forefather of all the Anbiya that came after him. وَجَعَلْنَا فِي ذُرِّيَّتِهِمَ النُّبُوَّةَ. After Nuh alayhi salam, all the prophets came from his progeny, amongst them Ibrahim. And Allah filled Ibrahim alayhi salam's family with prophets. All the prophets who were the children of Ishaq and came to Bani Israel, Yaqub alayhi salam and his sons, Yusuf alayhi salam, and then the famous ones include Dawood alayhi salam and Sulaiman alayhi salam, Zakaria alayhi salam and Yahya alayhi salam. The prophets of Banu Israel, Isa alayhi salam being the last of them, and then from the children of Ismail alayhi salam, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So Ibrahim alayhi salam is the father of prophets, but what does the word Ibrahim mean? It's an Abrani word, it's not from Arabic. Most of the names of the Anbiya are from Abrani. Most are non-Arabic words. Anbiya came to different parts of the world. They spoke different languages. Ibrahim alayhi salam's name, the Mufassirin say it means Abun Rahim. Ibrahim means Abun Rahim, Ab Rahim. Ab means father and Rahim means merciful and compassionate. So Ibrahim alayhi salatu wassalam is a compassionate father. And in the hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam has referred to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam as a father. Now, of course, he was speaking to the Arabs, and they are the children of Ismail alayhi salam, the people of Makkah, and that they are connected in lineage to Ibrahim alayhi salam. But there's a spiritual connection for the whole ummah too. Millata abikum Ibrahim, the millah of your father Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam. And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam describes himself as a father too. I'm like a father for you, I teach you. It's mentioned in the hadith. And in the Quran, the Prophet ﷺ, Allah Ta'ala says, مَا كَانَ مُحَمَّدٌ أَبَا أَحَدٍ مِّن رِجَالِكُمْ وَلَكِنْ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ وَخَاتَمَ النَّبِيِّينَ. Now, in this verse, Allah Ta'ala mentions the station and rank of the Prophet ﷺ, and He mentions that the Prophet ﷺ is not a father of one of your men, because the Prophet ﷺ's male children passed away in childhood. Ibrahim, the son of Qibtiyya, Maria Qibtiyya, and Qasim passed away in his childhood. Tahir, Tayyib. So the sons, the male children of the Prophet ﷺ passed away in their childhood. They didn't grow up to see adulthood. But this ummah is the progeny, the spiritual progeny of the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet ﷺ is not a father of your men, walakin Rasulullah, but he's the messenger of Allah and he is the seal of prophets. Now, Allah Ta'ala also says in the Quran, the Prophet, peace be upon him, closer to you than you are to yourselves. أَوْلَى بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ مِنْ أَنفُسِهِمْ. And in fact, awla, one of the derivations, one of the tafsirs of this word is that he has more love for you than you do for yourselves. He's closer to you than you are to yourselves. وَأَزْوَاجُهُ أُمَّهَاتُهُمْ. And his wives are your mothers. Now what am I saying here in this intro? The point I'm making here is if the Prophet ﷺ has described himself as a father who teaches his children, and if his wives are our spiritual mothers, and if Ibrahim ﷺ is the compassionate father of this ummah and of the Arab world as well, what does this tell us? It tells us that the station of a parent, this metaphor is being used for the Anbiya ﷺ. It tells us of the sacred nature of being a father. And this is why there's a lot of responsibility that comes with it. Now, all creatures fend off enemies and harm from their offspring. Any animal, any creature will become fierce and defensive when there's a risk for the children. When a bird, a small bird of any species, when it's in an ordinary situation, it will run away from strangers. You approach it, it will fly off. But when a bird has a nest of chicks, it'll become defensive. Try approaching it. It will make a beeline for you. It'll be defensive. It'll attack you. A cat with kittens, a dog with puppies, any animal, big or small, animals are defensive when it comes to protecting their children. And they will be concerned about their physical welfare. An elephant, a lion of the jungle, wild animals will have tender feelings towards their own young, and they will feed them. They will go to great lengths to get food for them, and they will teach them as well. What happens is many birds, many flying creatures, eagles for example, what happens is when the young come close to the age when they are able to fly, they approach that point, the tipping point, the mother will push, the parent will push the eagle off the edge, the child, the eaglet. Try to push, and the child will resist. But eventually, the parent will succeed in pushing it into free fall. And during this point, the chick will spread its wings and it will learn to fly. And it'll come to an uncomely or even a steady landing for the first time. And now it will have the confidence to flap its wings and fly. So this is what happens. Initially, the parents give it that push. Now, how are we different? And how are we the same? Our instinct to look after our children is there. It's biological, it's natural, it's human. For the most part, we hear sad stories of when human beings will be cruel to their own children. This is when that human nature has been spoiled. And this human being has fallen to a level lower than animals. But normally, any decent, balanced human being will have those tender feelings towards their young. And this is why one of the maturing factors, one comes out of youth, sometimes a prolonged youth. A person can behave like an adolescent well into their adult life until suddenly there is the responsibility of parenthood. And now the same parent is carrying nappies and picking up groceries at odd moments, and they don't have time for their friends anymore because they have a sense of social responsibility, or at least they should have. So now mum and dad become responsible. So this is the natural state of a parent, where you want to look after your children. Parents will not sleep at night when the children are unwell. Parents will take the child to the doctor. The need for washing, bathing, feeding, education, all of these things. Now this is part and parcel of parenting. But this is with reference to the dunya, to the extent that the education too, by and large, is for earning a livelihood. But it goes further. Our responsibilities as human beings. Animals are not mukallaf of sharia. They are not ordained with halal and haram, fard and wajib and sunnah and mustahab and mubah, with this whole sort of spectrum of obligation and permissibility and and prohibition. There isn't this sort of spectrum. Animals are intuitively taught how to live, and they live their lives. And on the day of Qiyamah, animals will be resurrected as well. And in some situations where one animal, a horned animal, has head-butted an animal without horns, the animal that was oppressed will have the opportunity to take revenge. And the Mufassirin say that this will be just to show human beings and jinn kind that Allah Azza wa Jal is just, to show fairness. This will happen. And then the animals will be told, Kunu turaba, become dust. And they will become dust. That's the point at which people who have left this dunya without iman will wish too that they could become dust. So this is the difference. We live on. We are born into this dunya, we die, we are resurrected, we answer for our deeds, and Allah Azza wa Jal, He then gives reward and punishment. He forgives whomsoever He wills, and He doesn't forgive whomsoever He wills. So there is a consequence, and that's what changes things for us in the dunya. Our responsibility towards our children goes far beyond the physical well-being of the children, looking after their welfare, ensuring that they're healthy and happy and well-fed. Animals do that, we do that. We ought to do it, but it's not all that we're there for. Our responsibility goes beyond this. It goes towards the akhirah. It's about helping our children to recognize their answerability to their master, recognition of the Creator, recognition of life after death, a realization of the spiritual realm, a realization that life is not just about eating and drinking. We don't live to eat, we eat to live, and there's a proper and improper way of eating. So it's this realization, the purpose of life, the goal of life, the objective of life. And so, this being the situation, our responsibilities go far beyond the physical upkeep. So what does this mean? Now I recited a verse of the Quran before you, and I recited a hadith. In this verse, Allah Azza wa Jal, Surah Al-Tahrim, Allah Ta'ala says to the believers, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, O believers, qu. Here's an instruction. When you, after the verses, when a verse begins with Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, for the most part, in most places in the Quran, these verses are Madani verses. These are revealed in Medina Munawwara after the Hijrah. And in Medina Munawwara, in Makkah Mukarramah, the verses which were revealed were often related to aqaid and beliefs. And there was a reference to previous nations, the Akhirah, Qiyamah, prophethood and Risala, beliefs, tenets of Iman and faith. And a lot of the verses which were revealed in Medina Munawwara were related to rules, instructions. There's an instruction here, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, O believers. And when we hear these words, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, O believers, our hearts and minds should open up. We should become attentive because Allah Ta'ala is telling us something. What is Allah saying here? Qu. He's giving us an instruction. Protect. Qu. It's an instruction. Now, we need to understand that when Allah Azza wa Jal gives us an instruction, this itself is proof that it's possible for us to fulfill that instruction. Allah Azza wa Jal does not oblige us to do anything which is beyond us. So we can take means towards what Allah has instructed us to do. What does Allah Ta'ala say? قُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَهْلِيكُمْ نَارًا. Protect yourselves and your families from a fire. وَقُودُهَا النَّاسُ وَالْحِجَارَةُ. A great fire, the tanween denotes this magnitude of this and severity. Protect yourselves and your families from a fire, وَقُودُهَا النَّاسُ وَالْحِجَارَةُ, whose fuel is people and stones. عَلَيْهَا مَلَائِكَةٌ غِلَاظٌ شِدَادٌ. appointed upon it are angels, harsh of character and physically strong. غِلَاظٌ شِدَادٌ لَا يَعْصُونَ اللَّهَ مَا أَمَرَهُم. They will not disobey Allah in that which He has commanded them to do. وَيَفْعَلُونَ مَا يُؤْمَرُونَ. And they will do exactly as they have been commanded. So on the one hand, you have a severe fire, and its fuel is not ordinary fuel. The things which don't normally burn in the dunya, you see examples of the hot lava coming out of a volcano. Otherwise, you don't normally see molten rocks. But in Jahannam, the stones that people worshipped in the dunya in the form of idols will burn. And this will be a demonstration of their weakness, of their dependence, that they can't help anybody, they couldn't help anybody, and they can't help anybody now. They are burning. وَقُودُهَا النَّاسُ وَالْحِجَارَةُ. People and stones. So people will go into Jahannam, people will go into Jannah. Some will go into Jannah, some will go into Jahannam. Some will go into Jahannam and then come back out. And stones will burn. And appointed upon this Jahannam will be angels. And these angels, Allah Ta'ala mentions two attributes, Ghilav and Shidad. These angels will be very fierce in their character, very, very fierce. There'll be no kindness about them. And Shidad, they'll be physically very strong, very stern and very strong. Now, and وَيَفْعَلُونَ مَا يُؤْمَرُونَ. They'll be doing as they have been told to do by Allah. So if their instruction is to punish, and they are fierce in character and physically strong, then imagine the consequence of this. So what are we being told? Well, this is why the Quran is Rahmah, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is Rahmah. We're being told that this Jahannam is there. Be warned about it. Be aware that it exists and prepare for it. And avoid getting there, avoid falling in. And you do this by fulfilling your obligations and avoiding the prohibitions. And protect your family as well. Your spouses, your children. Be concerned about their welfare. Now, it's the metaphor which is in the forefront of our minds, so I'll use it because the point is to explain. This virus, everybody knows of its danger. Everybody acknowledges this, the deaths it's caused. And yet it's an invisible thing. It has to be understood. You can't physically show it to somebody. And this is the reality. This is the reality with so many other things in this dunya and in the akhirah. The consequences of our actions, their outcome will become manifest in the akhirah. What we do in the dunya, the seeds of our a'mal which we plant in the dunya, will be manifest in the akhirah. So we cannot assume for a moment that what we do has no outcome, no complication, no consequence, no implication. And the same applies for our children. So protecting our children from the punishment of the hereafter is about educating them about their obligations to the Creator and to His creation. Huququllah and Huququl Ibad. Now the title of today's discussion is Responsible Parenting. And so there's a couple of points I wish to make here. We have extremes, don't we, as we do in everything else in this dunya. We have those parents who are very, very harsh and severe with their children. And they want to control every aspect of their children's decision making and their life, everything. And so the children have no say whatsoever. So from an early age, of course parents no wise parent will listen to their child in everything that they do. But the degree to which this parental control is applied, so from the food that the child eats, to the snacks that they can have, to the clothes that they wear, to the shoes that they buy, to the toys that they can have, you can see there's a whole spectrum. There's the one parent in a situation in which the child has no say whatsoever. Very severe, very strict. And this goes all the way up through life. The choice of subjects at school, the university courses, the marriage partner, on and on. All different aspects of life, the business and the career, the university degree. This is one situation. And the other situation is where the parent abdicates responsibility. The parent is not there. It's almost as though the child is a yatim, an orphan. It's almost as though the child doesn't have parents. The child searches for role models outside of the family because the family doesn't have any role models. Mum and dad, or dad and mum, one or the other, or both, they're not there for the child, or they're not there in any responsible way. And so the child eats anything the child wants and spends on whatever the child wants. And the child doesn't grow up being responsible for their timekeeping and for their homework and for their manners and for their dietary habits and for their exercise and for their social habits and for their view on morals and ethics and on substance abuse and on friendships and relationships and on and on. And so here you have a situation where the child is pretty much left to their own affairs. And so they end up in, depending on their circumstances, it doesn't necessarily result in, some individuals are blessed and many people come out in both situations very well. Others don't. But this is the other extreme. Now there's a balance to be struck here. And this is the important point. There's a balance to be struck in moderation. So let me give an example here. We're talking about how you educate your kids. I like this example because it's from the Quran and it applies in a broader sense as well. The Quran gives us principles. You know, raising an orphan. If an orphan has an estate, their share of the inheritance. An orphan, a yatim in the Sharia, is a child whose father has passed away before the age of puberty. The child isn't baligh. Now, a lot is mentioned in the Quran and Sunnah about the orphan because orphans are taken advantage of. Oftentimes, people will take their share of their inheritance, for example, or they'll treat them cruelly in many parts of the world, or if relatives are looking after them, they won't treat them like their own. So there's a lot of virtue in raising orphans, a lot of virtue. And today we are, sadly, in a world in which we institutionalize orphans, because that's the only sort of solution left, where we have orphanages. Now that's better than not making any arrangements for orphans in many parts of the world, and to support such projects is good if they're run properly. But it's not the ideal situation. The Sahaba didn't establish orphanages. They took the child, the Prophet himself, they took orphans into their own houses and they raised them with respect and love. So this is a problem that we have in our society today, in our Asian community in particular, where, and it's not fair to generalize, there are exceptions, where people find it difficult to show love to someone who's not their own blood. This is why we have a problem when people have step parents, because they can't show love to someone who's not their own blood and flesh. That's a sad situation. Our hearts should be bigger than that. So, the orphan. Now, what does the Quran say? The Quran says you look after their estate, their inheritance, their share of inheritance, until وَابْتَلُوا الْيَتَامَى حَتَّى إِذَا بَلَغُوا النِّكَاحَ, until they reach the age of puberty, an age in which they could marry if they wanted to marry. So what happens now? وَابْتَلُوا الْيَتَامَى, you keep testing them until they reach this age. فَإِنْ آنَسْتُم مِّنْهُمْ رُشْدًا فَادْفَعُوا إِلَيْهِمْ أَمْوَالَهُم. Then if you see the signs of intelligence in them, then you can give their share to them. And this will depend on their age. The Quran says, وَلَا تُؤْتُوا سُفَهَاءَ أَمْوَالَهُمُ الَّتِي جَعَلَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ قِيَامًا. Don't give, the word safi is used for a fool, someone who's not sensible. So don't give sufaha the wealth which Allah has made a qiyam for you, a source of upkeeping for you. So don't give it to them if they're going to sort of blow it, as you say. So you wait till they are sensible enough. So this example of the orphan, and we'll come to why I'm mentioning this. But how do you do this? The Mufassirin say, ulama say, they give examples. How can you test an orphan to see if the orphan is ready to take the responsibility of money, their share of the estate? How can you test them? So they're not going to blow it. You give them the property or the money, the pot, whatever it is, you give them access to that. How are you going to know? So this is an interesting point. As a tangent, the age of 18, when you can get your first credit card, for example, lots of other sort of liberties that you get at this age, this comes from, historically, we can trace it back to the fiqh of Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, the age of 18 and the age of responsibility. But this is a separate point. So what happens is, when the child is approaching this age, how do you test them? Are they wise enough to take financial responsibility? Well, this is what you do. One way you do it is you give the child some money, okay? So we've just passed Eid, so it was Eid day, for example. You give the child £10, £20, £50, whatever is appropriate, your circumstances, yours. You give them some money. And you didn't tell them what to do with the money. You left it with them. Several days later, you say, son, beta, beti, what did you do with that money? And you see if they used it wisely or they blew it. A wise option might have been to buy something they needed. A pair of shoes, some clothes, or something for their school, or even food, perhaps. Or what did they spend it on? Did they spend it on something which wasn't even permissible? Did they gamble it? Did they spend it on arcade machines? Whatever it may be. Gamble it online? What did they spend it on? On their friends? What did they do with it? What did they do with that money? Or did they spend it on something which was pretty useless? They bought something which makes no sense. They bought some junk, some toy, whatever it may be. Some useless app which is of no use to them. So you can see if they are wise enough. And now there's an opportunity to do nasiha. If they've spent the money wisely, you say, well done, shabash, you're a sensible person, you know how to spend your money. And if they haven't, you give them a wise word. Look, this isn't how you spend money. You should have spent it on something which would have been useful to you. So one way is that you give them money, but you don't tell them what to do with it. And the other approach is that you give them money and you tell them what to do. So that, let's suppose, for example, they do need a jacket, a pair of shoes, whatever it may be. You say, off you go to the shops and you can choose. You can choose. Go and buy yourself a pair of shoes. And you see what they buy. What have they done? Have they been sensible and moderate? Have they chosen quality? Or has it just been the color? I can remember, if I can give this example, when we were children, my father used to ensure that the shoes we bought were not slippy. He would ensure that the soles have a good grip so that we wouldn't fall when we were running about. This was the important condition for my father. He would say that make sure you buy shoes which don't have a flat sole. They have a good grip. But the point here is that you can test the child's intelligence. So on this occasion, in the first example, you allowed the child to choose how to spend their money. In the second example, you have told them that this money is for this purpose, but you give them some discretion about how they fulfill that purpose. And then when they come back, you see, have you bought a sensible buy? Is it a sensible purchase? Or have you spent too much on something which wasn't worth it? How have you spent your money? So this is how you check if children, now this example I'm giving of orphans, because they are going to be responsible for their own pot, but we can easily, just as easily, apply this example to our own children. When we are raising them, how do they spend their money? Do they spend it wisely or do they blow it? So the point we were making earlier is extremes. One extreme is the parents they want to control everything that the child does, every decision, everything that the child does. Such a child, I came across a piece last couple of days, and it was about staking trees. If you want to plant a tree, staking trees, and there's two schools of thought apparently. I find this fascinating. You buy a new sapling, you want to plant a tree, and this new sapling, you plant it into the ground. Now, obviously, it's susceptible to the wind, to the weather. So do you put a stake next to it before you plant it into the ground and then put the tree next to the stake and tie it together? Or do you not do that? There's two positions. One position is that if you stake the tree, that's a good thing. It'll protect the tree from the early storm. And when the tree is still a sapling, it's not going to be uprooted, it's not going to snap. It's one position. So the tree needs the stake so it doesn't move in the ground. The other position is that the worst thing to do for a tree is to stake it, because it will always be weak as a consequence. It will always rely on the stake. When you plant a sapling and it gently sways with the wind, it learns to be flexible with the wind, and it grows roots to support it against the wind. So it'll try to grow upright even though the wind predominantly, for example, is coming from one direction. So if this tree reaches maturity, it will be a strong specimen of a tree. Now, of course, I'm not suggesting that one is right and the other is wrong, but I can use this analogy, you can use this analogy, this metaphor for human beings. Indeed, in hadith, the mu'min is described like a tree, the date palm, which is actually very strong and firmly rooted, and it gives a lot of fruit. It's a beneficial tree. So basically, if you stake the tree to the extent that it becomes dependent, it's a bit like constantly walking with, what do you call them? Crutches. What's it going to do? It's going to weaken you. And so if you insist on walking with crutches all the time, your legs will lose their ability to walk. What happens if you're bedridden for a few days after an illness? You feel weak initially when you stand up again. And so on the other hand, if you have injured your leg, you temporarily do need crutches. So parents are there for the child to a certain stage of development. So if they are overbearing, such children will never be confident in the big wide world. Or if the children want to spread their wings, then there'll be this tug of war. The parents want to possess the child. And that's no ideal situation. On the other hand, if you abandon your children and neglect them, what's going to happen now? The same problem. Now the children don't have any sense of direction either. So it's a fine balance. Now there's no single answer to this. Every situation is unique. But the important thing here is responsible parenting is about thinking these things through. It's about being aware of these responsibilities. It's about thinking about how we are going to fulfill our obligation to our children, قُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَهْلِيكُمْ نَارًا, so that they spend their adult life knowing that there's a right and a wrong way of doing things, knowing that they must make the right choices, that there are implications in the dunya and in the akhirah, knowing that it's not just the quick thing, the short term that they need to think about. There's a longer, further objective goal which needs to be fulfilled. So this is one point. Now, moving on from this point, the initial responsibility of educating children with reference to Deen and Islam is the obligation of the parents. It's the fard of the mother and the father. It is their responsibility. However, if parents find that they cannot fulfill this responsibility by themselves because of a lack of education on Deen or in Deen, or because of a lack of time, not being able to commit the necessary time, and the parents put this responsibility onto somebody else's shoulders, such as a teacher, an Islamic studies teacher, this is what is known as tawqeel. You have asked somebody else to fulfill your responsibility for you. Remember, doing this is absolutely appropriate in such circumstances, but it does not absolve you of your responsibility. It's still your duty to check if your children are receiving that education. What I see today in education is that I would say that, broadly speaking, there are 4 types of parents. 4 types of parents. You could apply this analogy to school education, you could apply it to Islamic education. You have the one parent, coming back to the original situation, who's extreme. And if there's any indication that the teacher or the school is unhappy, the parent will be very severe with the child. This isn't appropriate and it's not beneficial. This is one type of parent. The other type of parent is at the other end of the spectrum. And this is the type of parent who is disinterested, who has no time for their child, who isn't interested in talking to the teachers. If the teachers want to raise an issue about the child, this parent isn't interested. Whether there's a report card full of positives or negatives, the parent isn't interested. A third type of parent is a parent who is defensive of the child at any cost. And this I find bizarre, where parents will turn against teachers because of a complaint which comes, because they don't believe their child is capable. So they'll assume that they'll be defensive of the child. Now, in ordinary circumstances, why would any teacher want to accuse a student of something that the student hasn't done? But sometimes parents have a blinkered approach. They don't believe their own children are capable of some of the things that the children do in the school playground. Because in front of the parents, the child is... See, just to give you an example, the kind of language which comes out of the mouths of young people on a football pitch perhaps is going to be very different, or with their friends, than they will speak in front of their parents. So sometimes children can do things in the absence of their parents which they won't do in their presence. So this is the third kind of parent who's defensive of the child and is not interested in a partnership. The fourth type of parent, sadly a rare species unfortunately, which in our experience, But the fourth type of parent is the balanced, moderate parent who is happy to go into a partnership with the child and the teacher. And it's a three-way triangle. These are the ingredients of success, of a bright future, where the parent and the teacher, because both have mutual compassion for the child, will constructively discuss the child, and then both will have their input. But the point I was making is tawqeel. When you give your child over for their education and their upbringing and their tarbiyah to a teacher, then you've not absolved yourself of your responsibility. Your input is still required, and the teachers can't be the parents. The parenting element is still necessary. You still have to give time to your children. You still have to discuss their progress with them. You still have to support them in their journey towards adulthood. And of course, it's no easy journey, and it has many turns, and every child and every person is unique, and every person has unique challenges, some because of their health, others because of certain conditions, others because they're perfectly healthy, but just because of the way their personality is. Different children learn in different ways, different children respond in different ways. And so all of this is part and parcel of this discussion. So responsible parenting then, first of all, it's about being aware of your responsibility. Time.
9:38.
Okay. It's about being aware of your responsibility towards your children. It's about educating them, not just about their dunya, about their physical well-being, but about their responsibility towards their creator, which is their iman, it's their salah and saum, it's their hajj and their zakah, and it's beyond this as well. And huququl ibad, their duty towards Allah's creation, towards family and relatives, towards their spouses, towards, and I'm coming to the parents briefly, towards neighbors, towards society, all of this, with reference to parents. Unfortunately, it's no use when the children have grown up and now they have no space, no time, no place in their heart for the parents. The relationship isn't there. It's no use if the parent asks and they contact the local imam and they say, what rights do I have over my children? Because they want them to say to the child, these are my rights over you. It's too late. That's not going to achieve anything. There's two sides to this. Flip the coin. What about the rights of the child over the parent? Had they been fulfilled, we might not be in this situation. This is not a justification, by the way, for young people not to show respect to their parents and not to fulfill their obligations towards them. But parents need to understand that it's a two-way street, and our intention should not be, parents want, oftentimes we see, parents want children to obey them. But it's not about any moral or ethical reason. They might want to say to their children that it's your obligation in deen and in Islam to obey your parents and show respect to them, but they're not saying this because of taqwa and fear and with any sort of sentiment about the akhirah. They just want their children to do as they're told. Our reason for wanting our children to respond to us in a particular way, to have a positive relationship, should be for the sake of deen, for the sake of Allah Ta'ala. Because Allah Azza wa Jal has obliged them to show respect to their parents, and because we don't want them to become sinful. So it shouldn't be about, and the implication will be, the difference will be, the parent who is more concerned about their children's obedience to Allah Azza wa Jal and to Allah's Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam will be concerned when the child doesn't perform salah. They'll be concerned when the child's lifestyle isn't Islamic. But the parent who is only concerned about themselves, this won't bother them. They'll only be concerned when it affects them personally. The child wants to make a decision in life which the parent doesn't want. The fact that the child never gets up for Fajr is not a concern for the parent. The fact that the child is in the wrong company isn't a concern. But now, because the child wants to take a particular sort of career path, or there's disagreement perhaps in the choice of marriage partner, now the parent is unhappy and then they're saying to the child, you have to obey me. What about in the other things? So it's a much bigger picture. Now, there is no sort of single one-size-fits-all here. This is an area of education, of exploration. But if there's one thing which perhaps we can gather from today's gathering, from today's discussion, is that we have an obligation towards Allah. Allah Azza wa Jal has put this responsibility on our shoulders, and we are answerable for this responsibility. The hadith I recited at the start, كُلُّكُمْ رَاعٍ وَكُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهِ. Each of you is a responsible person, and each of you will be questioned about his responsibility. That includes parents and children as well. We are obliged to fulfill our parenting role towards our children. And it's not just about buying them clothes. It's not just about buying them toys or perhaps phones and digital devices. It's not just about feeding them. It's not just about taking them on holiday. It's about working on them on a much more intimate level so they become very decent human beings and they become a positive contribution to society, so that when we leave this dunya, they are something that we can be proud of in the hereafter as well, and they're a source of reward for us in our graves as well. May Allah Azza wa Jal grant us tawfiq.
Maulana Sahib, first question for tonight, just following on from a parent's responsibility around education. It's quite a long question. I am experiencing difficulty encouraging my teenage children to read their namaz. I don't want to use force, as this may drive them away from Islam. How can I encourage them in a manner they will understand the responsibility themselves?
I'm wanting to encourage my children to perform salah. I don't want to use force. I don't want to use force.
As this may drive them away.
As this may drive them away. How can I
encourage them in a manner?
Encourage them in a manner that they will understand. Okay. So basically, 2-3 points on this. 2-3 points. One is by example. By example. If we are performing salah regularly ourselves, this will be a positive influence, inshallah. And let us not underestimate this. And I want to mention something here. This is subtle. It's not always immediately evident. So you may already be very regularly performing salah in front of your children. They might have been seeing that for years. This may show its benefit even after you are gone. And that's the point to understand. It's about planting the seed. It's about planting the seed. So this is one point. So do have salah in your houses as well. Perform some salah in your house. And especially under lockdown, at the start, for weeks, we reiterated this message that have jama'ah in your house, congregational prayer. So one is by example. The second is by creating an environment in which this is discussed. Now, one way of doing this is by reading something together as a family. Read something together. So a book about deen generally. Now, I want to mention something here. Iman and its branches, this is all one picture. It's all connected together. All of our deen goes back to the same root. So sometimes your journey towards Allah Ta'ala comes through one source, sometimes through another. But you all end up in the same place. And what I mean by this is, as soon as that sort of initial flickering light illuminates the heart of the child, the young person, they will naturally be drawn towards salah. So you don't have to say directly perform salah if they're going to reject this. You can eventually do this. Open a book on the virtues of salah. The Virtues of Salah is a book by Sheikh Zakaria, which we recommend for families, and the whole set. But if that is a bit too provocative because your child are going to reject this, it's a bit too obvious, well, obviously you want them to perform salah, but you can use a different approach. Why not open the book about Sahaba, the virtues of Sahaba, or a section completely different, the virtues of dhikr. And what you do is, as a family, you sit together and one person reads, and you can take turns. Take turns, read for 10 minutes each. You don't say anything. You don't need to say a single word. You can discuss it if you wish. That's not necessary either. One approach which is useful to reiterate the message is to read one section, the hadith and commentary, once, twice, maybe 3 times. And then you just close the book. And you make sure it's not tedious. It's tedious when it's half an hour long. Keep the session short and sweet. 10 minutes or so, 7 minutes, 9 minutes, 12 minutes. But do it regularly. What will happen is, as a family, when you are all engaging in this deeni activity, the love of Allah, which itself is nur, the love of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which itself is nur, will enter into the hearts. It will illuminate the hearts. And then the hearts will soften, because this is the implication. And then salah will become attractive, because the hijab, the veil of darkness, when it moves and the rust moves away from the heart, the Quran mentions the rust of the heart. When the rust is moved away, then the mirror of the heart reflects the truth, and there's an impact. So this is one. So the first one was by example. The second is, have some gathering, some activity in the household, which is deeni, in which we talk about Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam too. And the third thing is gentle encouragement. So don't be harsh, very gently. and the carrot, not the stick. So what you do is when the child does perform salah, then what you do is you give them a lot of acknowledgement, a big smile, and just express your happiness. Or just for the rest of that day, just be extra nice. Go out of your way. So you express your appreciation. And so the third point is encouragement. And this should go on permanently. وَأْمُرْ أَهْلَكَ بِالصَّلَاةِ. Now you don't have to be harsh. To instruct your family to perform salah is your responsibility for your whole life. But you don't have to be harsh. So whether the child gets up or not, do knock on their door. Do go over to their bedside and encourage them to get up for salah. Do, when they wake up late in the morning, say, Beta, have you performed Fajr today? Just a reminder. So you don't go on about it, but you drop it into their ear. And you don't say it in a way that they're going to respond negatively. You need to make a judgment here. This was the third point. And the fourth one, and the last one in this particular set of recommendations is dua. Do not underestimate the value of your dua for your own children. And the important one, رَبَّنَا هَبْ لَنَا مِنْ أَزْوَاجِنَا وَذُرِّيَّاتِنَا قُرَّةَ أَعْيُنٍ وَجَعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا and رَبِّ جَعَلْنِي مُقِيمَ الصَّلَاةِ وَمِنْ ذُرِّيَّتِي. You might already be reciting this one in your salah. Ibrahim alayhi salam's dua. Oh Allah, make me one who establishes your prayer and from my progeny as well. So there's a dua for your children, and this dua is also inclusive of your parents. رَبِّ جَعَلْنِي مُقِيمَ الصَّلَاةِ وَمِنْ ذُرِّيَّتِي رَبَّنَا وَتَقَبَّلْ دُعَاء. رَبَّنَا, oh Allah, accept this dua. There's a dua for acceptance of dua in the dua. رَبَّنَا وَتَقَبَّلْ دُعَاء. رَبِّ جَعَلْنِي مُقِيمَ الصَّلَاةِ وَمِنْ ذُرِّيَّتِي رَبَّنَا وَتَقَبَّلْ دُعَاء. رَبَّنَا اغْفِرْ لِي وَلِوَالِدَيَّ وَلِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَوْمَ يَقُومُ الْحِسَابُ. So these 4 points. One is by example. 2, have an activity, an Islamic activity, so that Allah's love and the love of His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam can pass through, it can spread in the family and increase. 3, gentle encouragement, and 4, dua. Ji.
What factors should you consider when naming your newborn child?
What factors should you consider when naming your newborn child? First, that the name is permissible, because some names are not permissible. Some names which have a meaning which is contrary to the spirit of Iman and Deen, and which includes certain names which are very arrogant names. They have a meaning of arrogance that's not appropriate. As 2, you can't use names which are exclusively for Allah. There are some names which are Allah's names as when they're used in that sense, but they're used to describe people as well. But there are other names which are exclusively for Allah. So for example, you wouldn't use the name Rahman, for example. So, and 3, they ought to be Islamic names. So it might not be a name that's not that doesn't have a negative meaning or a meaning which isn't appropriate, but it might not be an Islamic name at all. And this is commonly the case. People, and by the way, don't trust some of these websites. Very wishy-washy. I'm talking about this point after years and years and years of experience of people searching something online, and the websites denote some positive meaning, some romantic meaning, but when we check in the dictionary, many of these words don't even exist in Arabic. We've never heard of them. So the third point is, make sure it's an actual Islamic name, which means it's being used by Muslims historically. And this is the point. Originality doesn't mean uniqueness. Originality, you might want to use a name perhaps which is less commonly used, although there's nothing wrong with using popular names, Islamic names, but don't use one which has never been used at all. Otherwise, you may have a unique child with unique characteristics which you might not appreciate. So the point here is, associate the name with the history of that name. So the names of Anbiya alayhimus salam, the names of Sahaba, the names of the ladies amongst the Sahaba, the Prophet's wives and daughters, these names will never grow old. They will never grow old. And so choose a name which has a history behind it, in the sense that it relates to role models within Islam. And avoid names, finally, the final point here, avoid names which are indicative of people or lifestyles which are contrary to the Islamic example. Ji.
How do you deal with unruly teenagers?
How do you deal with unruly teenagers? This is actually the point of our discussion today. Now, it's going to be, every situation is going to be unique, and it's going to be a question of each give and take in any given situation. So Okay, it starts with how is your relationship with your teenager to begin with? What is the backdrop? What is our starting point? Have we had a history of problems with this child? Number one. Or is it suddenly that they have become teenagers? And number two, what is the problem? Is it just being a bit temperamental, a bit moody? Is it more severe than that? Number three, what is it causing them to do? Are they just, is it affecting their family relationships? Is it going much deeper than that? Number four, what are the outside influences? The outside influences. Is it social media? Is it friendships? What is their lifestyle? So these types of factors need to be assessed before we can answer this question. Having assessed all of these things, now what will happen depends sort of where the child is at. So it's not one size fits all. But what we need to establish, and I'll repeat this point again, I've mentioned this before, there are three situations. One is a breakdown of relationship where there's complete sort of cold shoulder, silence, no talking. It's not a happy situation to be in. Whoever's caused it, whether it's coming from the child or the parent, it's not where you start from. It's not a starting point. The other is violence. And this is physical sort of harshness as well, where the child becomes aggressive or you become aggressive. Not an ideal situation. We need to get out of that situation. And the third is the situation where there's dialogue. And this will happen where there's mutual trust. And this needs to be established. Now, normally, in the worst of situations too, unruly teenagers, it won't be a case of not talking to each other for days. If we're that far gone, then we need to really work carefully and work very hard. There'll be moments in the day and night when things are a bit happier. So what needs to happen is, if we are struggling to establish a parental relationship, then we might wish to establish a different type of relationship. In today's world, this may be necessary. Rather than playing the parent, the sort of superior position of being the paternal and maternal sort of instinct, make friends with this child, this young person, and talk to them on a friendly level. And talk to them about something which is not provocative. So even though you're unhappy with this part of their life, don't discuss it until you've got that trust. Talk about the things which are not going to be provocative. The British thing, when you talk to strangers, talk about the weather. Well, you're not going to talk about the weather to your child normally, but there'll be things you can talk about. And so talk about the things which are not provocative and are not going to cause problems, and have a smile about those. Share a joke, sit together, share a meal, go for a walk, whatever it is you can do. There's always going to be some little, no matter how severe, normally there'll be some little place in their life where you can have some interaction. It might just be about, doing their room up for them, or getting them, whatever it is, just putting them to bed, because you can do this we fail. We ought to do this with all the children as well, not just with small toddlers. That relationship should be there. So find a slot in their life where there is some mutual interaction, where they feel relaxed because they don't feel threatened. And so then you build on that. You build on that. So this was one point. The second point, which I mentioned earlier relating to salah, is what do? You give them a lot of acknowledgement when they do something positive. And if there's something you can do together, it might be a game. Games with families are very beneficial. It's to be encouraged. Physical activities. It might be anything. It might be so something you can do together. So when you build this relationship, and then you give them acknowledgement and recognition for the positives, supported with lots of dua and patience, and not becoming impatient and frustrated and angry when they do something wrong, you will gradually get to a situation, with Allah's help, where you can begin to talk about some things which you want to talk about, which are issues. Now, of course, this is a general answer. Now, we have extreme situations. What if the child is smoking weed? What if the child is with very dangerous company? Those situations it's more of the same, but it goes much deeper. Then there's more discussion here then. This is a separate point. So basically, in the time that we have, very briefly, I'll say, if the child is not a threat to the other children and the parents, he's not a physical threat, he or she, there's not a moral threat there, being a negative influence, then the relationship should be worked on. And everybody should be doing whatever, patiently working away, chipping at the edges until there's a time when, if there comes a time when the child is a physical or a moral threat to the family, then a more severe, a more serious sort of assessment of the situation needs to be taken, and it may be necessary to remove the adolescent from the setting as well. So this will be a much more severe situation. But I hope I'm giving some leads on this. By no means is this the end of the point, but I think parents need to realize that it's something which they need to invest in. Patience, communication, improving communication, dua, and having some positives as well. So that our relationship is not full of so many negatives that the children don't want the relationship anymore. That shouldn't be the case. Ji.
Well, let's have a final question as
Yeah.
we've run out of time.
Yep.
If your child's income is haram and you count on them for for helping pay for household expenses, will this money be haram for a parent to take?
If your child's income is haram and you count on them for family expenses, for your household expenses, will it be haram for you to take? Now, normally, in most situations, the majority, if a person's income is haram, it will be part of their income. And so they should be giving their contribution with the intention that this is from the proportion which is not haram. And you can take it with that intention. If all of it is haram, then you shouldn't be taking that income. You should find other means. And you should be assisting them, and they should be working hard to get out of that situation. So it's not appropriate for you to take money which is exclusively haram. There's some further detail here actually, but this is a quick summary of the answer. Ji.
That's fine. That's finished time up today. So any other questions, we'll just kind of follow up after.
Inshallah. Okay, we conclude here for now. May Allah accept our discussion, make it a source of benefit. Wa akhiru da'wana.